Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. Okay, so today I am going to tier rank the Goodreads most popular books of the decade. Now, I actually saw this on somebody's TikTok. I'll link it below, and I thought it was a really good idea. So Goodreads basically released this article, this list in November of the most popular books of the decade. Now, this isn't like the best books. This isn't the ones that everybody thinks is the best book. It's literally the most popular ones, so the ones that most people have read and rated and bought, and it's a very interesting list. Now, I am only going to be doing the ones I have read, which I believe is 37 of them, so I think it will give me a good number of books to work with. Now, I did a tier ranking video at the beginning of the year, so I'm going to do it in a similar vein, and I've also used the same tiers. First up, we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which is a gorgeous book. It very much lives up to its name. I loved reading it. The writing is just beautiful, and I think you can get really lost in that. I don't think it quite resonated with me in the same way it did with other people, you know, because it was a really good book, but like I know a few people that like it is hands down one of the best books they've ever read, and it wasn't quite that good for me, but I could really respect how amazing the writing was, and yeah, it's a powerful and emotional read. But it didn't quite have that edge, so I'm gonna put it in so good, but I would recommend reading it. Next we have Girl, Woman, Other, which I read a few years ago and adored. I have a real soft spot for short stories, and while it's technically not a book of short stories, it's very much written like one, because each chapter is a different person and has like an individual story, but the chapters and the people like weave together very subtly, which I loved. And I love it when short stories do that as well. So yeah, I definitely have a soft spot for it, and I really did enjoy it. I don't think I can put it in God tier, just because I'm saving that for like a few other books that I know are in here that I think just like resonated and touched me a little bit more, but I'm gonna put it with On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous in the so good tier. Then we have A Promised Land by Barack Obama, which I read a couple of years ago when it came out in hardback, and it is chunky. Like, this is a thick book, and it's not the longest book I've ever read, but it felt like the longest book I've ever read. And you know, Barack Obama is a very fascinating person, and I really wanted to read about all the things that he wanted to write about, but it's a lot. Like, there's a lot of very heavy, dense, dry material, and it takes a while to read. I'm pretty sure I spent the whole of January 2022 or 2021 reading it. Like, it basically took a whole month for me to finish. So I think because of that, I'm gonna have to put it quite far down, because I would definitely never read it again. And I also like wouldn't rave about reading it to anybody, unless you're like really into politics or really into Barack Obama. Because yeah, I think the abridged version would be great. I think the audiobook would probably be great, especially if it was narrated by him, but the whole thing is just long. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it in It Was Okay. Then we have Clara and the Sun. Now, I have read two of Ishiguro's books, one being Never Let Me Go, which I loved. I actually reread that a couple of months ago, and I still really loved it. Outstanding book. Loved the sentiment, what it was trying to do. Love a dystopia. Tick, tick, tick. Clara and the Sun, though, it's not for me. Like, I liked the premise. I liked, you know, how we're like immersed in this world, and I loved the idea of the interactions between like the humans and the AI, but I wanted it to go in a direction that it just didn't go in. And I think if it had been more about like the human side of AI, which I know sounds a bit contradictory, but like I wanted it to be a bit more like emotional and a bit more compelling, and it just wasn't. And so I didn't really love it. I can't really remember much about the storyline, to be honest, because it was just quite forgettable, and it definitely didn't live up to how much I love Never Let Me Go. So I think it's gonna have to sit with Barack Obama in It Was Okay, which I know will offend some people because I know how much people love that book. Then we have An American Marriage, which I think was actually a book club pick, like right in the early days of my book club. And honestly, I remember enjoying the book. I remember thinking the writing was good and I enjoyed the story, but I just think it's very forgettable. Like I don't think I've thought about that book much since I read it. The only thing I think that really stuck with me is the thing about like the dolls, making the dolls, because that was a bit weird. But apart from that, it's just not a book I ever really think about, so I don't think I can really put it quite high up. But I do remember thinking it was a good story. It had a lot of interesting discussion points, especially for a book club, so I think I'm going to put it in solid, because I didn't hate it, but I'm also not raving about it or telling anybody to read it on a regular basis. Okay, this is where I might start getting a bit tricky. So we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which there was so much hype for on social media, and it was one of those books that I felt like I had to buy because everybody was talking about it. And I follow a few other creators on Instagram, and I love them, I love what they do, I love their creation, but it becomes quite obvious that we just don't like the same books, and that is absolutely fine. But it's like books like this where it becomes quite clear, because they're raving about it, they love it so much, and I think, oh, I really respect them as people, I really love them as content creators, I'm going to buy the book, I'm going to read it. Oh my god, it was awful. It was so boring and self-centered, and like, why do I care about anybody in this book? The only thing that saved it was the ending, and like, it really didn't save it by much, it just kind of pushed it over the edge a tiny bit, but like, wow, I hated that book so much. It was such a slog to get through. And like, ultimately, I am the kind of person that is going to love a book if I can like connect to a character and love that character. Then I'll be invested in their story, I'll be willing them to be okay. But everybody in this was insufferable, and they were intended to be insufferable, but like, why would I want to read a book like that? Why would I enjoy reading a book like that? So I am gonna have to put it in so bad, which again, I feel like everyone's gonna hate me for, but I will. I've got to stick to my truth. Then we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is a trilogy now, which is translated from Japanese, and again, it had quite a lot of hype. I believe that Toshikazu Kawaguchi wrote a play of this book. Oh no, sorry, wrote the play first, and then this book is an adaptation of the play, which is really interesting, like a very interesting way to do it, because I don't think that is like often seen. So yeah, really was intrigued to read it. It's like a very light sci-fi book because it involves a tiny bit of time travel, but really the time travel is very irrelevant. And yeah, again, I really love like the human side of it. It was very compelling. Again, similar to Girl and Mother, it's got like a short story feel to it, because it kind of centres on different groups of characters or different characters, and so you kind of get all of these different stories but in one overarching story, and I really loved that. And the second one's pretty good. I haven't read the third one, but they're all quite similar. I think for me, again, it was similar to the other ones that I've put in this tier. It was missing something, which is why I can't put it in God tier, but I do really love it. I recommend it regularly. It's also a really great book to read if you're looking for more translation as well. So I'm going to put it in so good. Next up is Crazy Rich Asians, which I have to say I've only read the first one. I think it's a trilogy, and I've only read the first one, and I have two of them. I just haven't read the other ones yet, because really stupid reason, but I'm sure some people can relate to this. It's got really small font, and honestly, when a book has really small font, I'm just a little bit put off. I don't know why. I just feel like I'm not going to get a lot of like, I'm not going to feel like I'm moving through something quickly if each page is taking so long to read. It also has a lot of footnotes, which is a really interesting way to write the book, because often I've seen other books do this, but where a word isn't translated, or where a word is very specific to a culture, then there will be like a little asterisk and a little footnote which will explain it to the reader, which I think is a great way to do it, but it just means it feels a little bit more like you're reading non-fiction, I suppose, so it feels a bit heavier. But I love the story, I loved the movie adaptation, and ultimately it's just a really like fun book with like really interesting, compelling characters and a great storyline, a good romance. So can't fault it. Gonna put it in so good, and I hope that I can read the rest of the series maybe in 2024. We'll see. Okay, next up is BTown. Now, I feel like I've gone on an interesting journey with these books. So BTown is a trilogy translated from Swedish by Fredrik Backman adore them. When I first read BTown, however, which was a while ago, so I have a friend called Jazz, Travels in Fiction, and she read it, and I remember her talking about it, being like, yeah, this good book is really great, and me thinking like, yeah, right, I'll read it. And I actually borrowed her copy, and I read it, and I was like, yeah, it's good, but I had like a couple of issues with it, so I actually gave it 4 stars initially. Then I ended up being sent the second one in hardback, just through chance. And I think I buddy read it with Jazz, but then we ended up not finishing it. Also, I can't remember, something happened, but I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I've really like slept on the first one, because the second one really compelled me and like made me an absolute BTown stan, because I loved it so much. I don't know what it was. I think like Frederick Backman just really leaned into beautiful writing for the sake of beautiful writing, which I love. Like, to be honest, I'm not a plot person. I am very much like, give me some beautiful writing, give me some good characters, and like, I'm sold, I'm in. And I love that. And then I bought The Winners, the third one, as soon as it was out. Absolutely sobbed throughout that book, and now they are like one of my favourite books of all time. So technically BTown shouldn't be in God tier, but I'm going to put it in God tier because of the rest of the series. And I think you kind of have to treat it like 3 books are 1 book, because like, I talk about this series so much. I talk about it whenever I talk about good books, whenever I talk about books that are going to make you cry, compelling characters, good translations. There are so many good reasons to read the series, so I can't not put it up there. And I know a lot of people will agree with me. Then Crying in Hmart, which is a memoir, which again is very emotional and compelling, and a lot of people adore that book, and I really did as well. I loved how much it was about the author's like own experience, but also considerate of talking about how it could be perceived by other people. So it's very much about her relationship with her and her mum, and I think it's just like a very balanced way to write a book, but at the same time like extremely personal and just like very emotional, and I think a lot of people could relate to it. And yeah, really enjoyed it, really loved it, and gonna put it in so good. This is going quite well actually. We've got a lot of positive like ones in the higher tiers so far. Then we have The Underground Railroad, which I have to admit I think I've read, but I can't actually remember whether I finished it or whether I DNF'd it, which I think says it all really. I know that this has been turned into a TV show, and as much as this sounds absolutely blasphemous, I think I might watch the TV show, and then if I like it, go back and try and read the book again, because I just don't really remember much about the book other than that I struggled with it, and I either struggled a lot throughout it or I struggled so much that I actually didn't finish it, and I honestly can't remember. So I can't put it in so bad, because I don't actually think that like it was a bad book. I think it was just me. So I'm going to put it in DNF because I think I might have DNF'd it. But it's one that I definitely will go back to, and like I said, maybe I can revisit it via the TV show, and that will convince me to read the book, because I know that it's like held in very high acclaim and I really want to enjoy it. I really want to experience it again, so I will give it a second chance. Then we have Heartstopper, which everybody loves. The books are great. The TV show is phenomenal. There are just so many reasons to love these books. Also, if you've never like read graphic novels, or you don't know where to start with graphic novels, Heartstopper is a great place, because they're like very easygoing in terms of like how to navigate the actual like illustrations and the story, but they do cover a lot of different really like hard and difficult themes. They're great for like coming of age and like teenage reading and young adult reading, but also great for adult reading. Like the TV show is a testament to how this is really a story for everybody, for like all ages. And yeah, I loved it. I'm going to put it in God tier, because what a great example of a success story in terms of graphic novels, books and TV adaptations. Like brilliant, just brilliant all round. Then Pachinko, which I read probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and really loved. It is so emotional. It's pretty heavy. It's historical fiction. There's a lot of painful moments in it, so I wouldn't go into it lighthearted, but it's really beautifully done, and it is a story that you probably won't stop thinking about for a long time. And again, I think that has a TV adaptation, which I haven't read. I haven't watched, but I maybe should, because I did really love the book. Similarly to On Earth, a Briefly Gorgeous, Girl with Mother, blah blah blah, I'm not going to put it in God tier just because there was something missing, like there wasn't something that meant it's not a book that's ever been in like my top 10 or my like top 10 wrap-ups of a year. It's not like often a book that I recommend, just because it's like, it's very emotional, there's a lot of difficult passages and themes and chapters, so it's not like a book that I automatically go, oh yeah, you should read Pachinko, especially to people who don't read a lot as well, because it's pretty heavy. So I'm going to put it in so good, because it's a great book that deserves all of the acclaim that it has, but it's just not a god tier book for me. And then we have Such a Fun Age, which was also a book that I read for book club, and again, similarly to An American Marriage, is a really brilliant book club read, because it opens a whole ton of like questions about like race and society, and like it just has so much to like pick apart and so much to discuss, which is really brilliant. And I thought it absolutely executed exactly what the author wanted it to, which is amazing, because often that doesn't happen. Like often with books you could see what the author was trying to do, but then it kind of falls apart and something about it just doesn't work. But I think this does what it needed to do really brilliantly. So again, going in so good. Then we have Everything I Never Told You, which I have read 2 Celeste Ng books, Everything I Never Told You and Little Fires Everywhere, and both of which I loved, but both of which there was something about them that I couldn't quite connect with. I think, again, kind of what I was saying about My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but not quite as bad, is like the characters aren't very likeable. They are kind of like despicable people, which is intentional, but it meant that there was just something missing for me. But I can really respect how good the books are, and especially with Everything I Never Told You, I do love how the author uses the characters and what she does with them and their relationships, so I did really love that. So I'm going to put it in solid. And straight after that is Little Fires Everywhere, and it is going in exactly the same place, because I really respect Celeste Ng as a writer and I really love what she does, and I can completely understand the hype, but there's just something in the books that is like missing for me that means I can't like quite connect to them. Maybe it's like an age thing, maybe like, I don't know, like they both focus sort of on like married couples with kids, and maybe I'd have more of a connection if I was older and I had children. Not sure, something missing, but they are really good books that I would recommend, so they're going in solid. Then we have another Fredrik Backman book, and that is Anxious People, and this is probably, I think, his most popular book in terms of like wider readership. Like if you asked 100 people on Goodreads what Fredrik Backman book have you read, they would probably say Anxious People, because for some reason it just had more of a hype than everything else. Personally, I think BTown and A Man Called Ove or Uva is better, but they're all good. I love most of Fredrik Backman's books. There's one exception, didn't love that one, but the rest of them I adore. So I really loved Anxious People as well. It also felt a bit different for Fredrik Backman, because it's kind of like a heist mystery which is definitely new for him. Normally he focuses very much on like small interpersonal stories, but this had like an element of like thriller to it almost, which yeah, made it interesting. So it's going in so good. Next is non-fiction, another memoir, When Breath Becomes Air, which is an emotional roller coaster. It's so much about it is truly heartbreaking, and knowing that the author is no longer alive, that he died before he could finish the book, and I think it was his wife that finished the book, is, yeah, devastating. And it brings just like a whole new level to the book, because throughout reading it I knew that he wasn't alive anymore, and yeah, it makes it just so devastating. But it's a really brilliant book for him to have done, and I'm so delighted that he was able to do it before he died, and I would really recommend it, but just make sure you're in a good place before you do, because it is difficult and tough, but it is really worth it. And yeah, like I said, I'm really happy that he was able to do it before he passed. So this is going to go in so good as well. Okay, then we have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is like probably the biggest book of this year or last year. Like, oh gosh, it was everywhere, like everybody loved it. I read it not that long ago, it's probably only about 2 months ago I read it, and I'm so glad I did, because I love Gabrielle Zevin anyway, because I've read Elsewhere by her, which I always rave about, and I really loved that I could read more from her. And there were so many parts of this book that I loved. It was really immersive. Like if you love video games, you'll love it. But equally, if you have no experience with video games like me, you will love it because of how accessible it is and how much it will make you like video games, like how much you can appreciate how much work goes into them and their like wider stories and like the struggles of people trying to like create them and the years of effort that go into them. Yeah, like I loved it for that. I also did love the main three characters, so it's Sam, Sadie and Marks, and I did love them all, especially Marks. Like, oh, I loved him so much. So there were elements of the story that, yeah, definitely ticked a lot of boxes for me, were 5-star reads. But the way that this book falls down is there is a lot of moments in the book where I just wanted to bash Sadie and Sam's heads together and just say, just talk to each other, guys. Just have a conversation. And if they did, it would have stopped, like, chunks of chapters even needing to be written. And as we all know, the miscommunication trope is like the worst trope ever. Nobody enjoys it. It's just incredibly frustrating and it would never happen in real life. So for that reason, I cannot put it too high up. I think I'm going to put it in It Was Okay, which feels a bit harsh because I did actually really enjoy it, but I just feel like there were too many parts of it that I got really frustrated about. So I can't really put it any higher than that. But it's somewhere between those two tiers, I think. Then The Vanishing Half, which I think again was a book club pick a while ago, and again similarly to American Marriage and Such a Fun Age, so many really detailed parts of the book that you can discuss and pull apart, and it makes it for a really interesting book club pick. Also as a twin, this was a really interesting book because obviously the two main characters are twins, but obviously as a white person this didn't, that's as far as my connection to the book went in terms of being a twin. But it takes a really interesting element of the two main characters relationship and then really just goes to town with it, so I really loved it for that. But I think again, similar to American Marriage, like it's not a book I recommend a lot because I can't really remember the details of it. I can't really remember why I enjoyed it and I just haven't really thought about it much since I read it, so I'm going to put it in solid, but it is a really good book and would recommend. Then Lessons in Chemistry, which was again a really popular book and I also really enjoyed. It's one of those ones where I read like the first third of it and I thought, yeah, this is okay, and then the more you read on, the more it just absolutely grips your heart. And there were just so many brilliant parts of the book. I loved her as a main character, what she was trying to do, her relationship with her daughter, her relationship with her husband. Oh, just, it's beautiful. And I haven't watched the TV adaptation yet because I'm genuinely just concerned how much I'm going to cry. So that is why I haven't watched it, but I'm sure it's brilliant. I love Brie Larson, so I will at some point watch it, and this is going in God tier because it is a stunning book and deserves all of the hype that it has. Then A Little Life. Now, I can't remember, I think this was included in my last tier book and I can't remember what I said about it and I can't remember which tier I put it in, but it's a difficult book for me because for a while, for at least I think like 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer, it was my favourite book. It was the book that if everybody said, what's your favourite book of all time? I would say, oh, this absolutely tragic book called A Little Life. But it's a very hard book to recommend to people because how can you recommend something absolutely stomping on your heart like that? They're like, oh, so much of it that's so graphic and difficult to read, but it is also a book that's just stuck with me, that I think about all the time, that I can have really interesting conversations with people about because there's so much about the book that I just really connected with and feel passionate about. But I also understand people's criticisms. I also understand the whole trauma porn narrative and why a lot of it can be quite damaging, and that's part of the reason it's not my favourite book anymore. And I think if I read it, I would have a different perspective on it, which would be really interesting, and I hope I can reread it at some point. So I can't really put it in God tier for that reason, but I am going to put it in so good because of how much I loved it when I first read it. Then The Tattoos of Auschwitz, which I actually think I spoke about in a recent video because I was, yeah, that was it, I was unhauling some books and it was included in that unhaul group. Now I read this a long time ago, like I think like 6 or 7 years ago, and when I read it I remember thinking, yeah, this is a good book, like historical fiction, very emotional, but I have since read a lot of criticism of the book which I think is extremely valid, and writing historical fiction, especially like World War II, especially Holocaust narratives, is definitely a really difficult task that should not be taken on lightly, and I think it's a book that hasn't aged well, and that, like I said, there's a lot of valid criticism about. So it's not a book I really want to like talk about or recommend, or like that's why I've unhauled it. I don't even have any interest in owning it anymore, so I'm gonna put it in It Was Okay, because I understand, like, if you know nothing about any if you're not familiar with the history or like the details, or can't like connect to the book on a personal level, I can understand why you think it's an interesting story, but then, like I said, I also understand the very valid criticisms, so I'm gonna put it there. Then there is The Goldfinch, which I have a tumultuous relationship with, but ultimately I did DNF, so it is going straight in there. I am not a Donna Tartt fan. I'm not really a dark academia fan, if that is even where it sits. It was just a very long book. It didn't connect with me at all. I don't understand why people like it. I'm just not a Donna Tartt fan. I don't really get like her style. I don't get how I'm supposed to relate to the characters, and they're just really long books as well, so it's not like you can kind of dip in and read it and think, yeah, that was okay, and then, you know, there was just not much about it I really enjoyed, so I DNF'd it about halfway through, and I'm very happy with that decision. I don't have any interest in picking it up again. Then Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, which I read again a long time ago, and I remember liking. I think it's got a good ending to it. Like the mystery element of it keeps it very gripping and means it's a pretty fast read. I'm not sure how much I would like it if I read it again, but I remember it being a pretty good book, so I'm going to put it in solid because I was gripped. I read it quite quickly and I think the ending was good, so no reason to hate on it. Malibu Rising, Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've read a few of her books, and it wasn't one of my favourite ones. I much prefer Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I think Malibu Rising was good. It's certainly better than One True Loves, which is another book I've read by her, but I've also seen a few people who didn't love it, and I kind of agree with why they didn't love it. Again, it's sort of that like unlikable narratives, like out of reach, sort of like rich personalities, so yeah, I didn't hate it, but I'm not going to reread it, so I'm going to put it in It Was Okay. Then another Obama memoir, this time Michelle Obama's Becoming, which was much easier to read than Barack Obama's, also much shorter, much more accessible, and I did enjoy it. So it is going in solid because I think it's a much more like politically accessible read. It goes into a lot of detail about like her life, her marriage to Barack, and obviously their like political life as well, but it's just so much more accessible. It's just much more like normal person subject matter, so I would recommend that one over A Promised Land for sure. Then two Kristen Hanna books, which I'll do at the same time. So The Four Winds and The Nightingale, both historical fiction. Now, I read The Nightingale and then like maybe 18 months later I read The Four Winds. And what I learnt from those two, I've not read any other Kristen Hanna books, but what I learnt from these two is she very much has a formula to her writing. And that meant I didn't enjoy The Four Winds as much as I enjoyed The Nightingale because I felt like I saw the ending coming, which was disappointing. But I loved The Nightingale a lot. I'm going to put it in God tier because I adore it. It's a book that I completely understand the hype about. I love it as a historical fiction. I love it as like a character study. I loved just so much of it. It's an emotional roller coaster, but it's so good. But yeah, The Four Winds I think just isn't as good because I saw the ending coming and it felt like basically the same book but set in a different part of history. So I'm going to put that one in solid because I think if you read it in isolation, having not read any other Kristen Hanna books, it's still good, but I just don't think you can enjoy it as much if you know where it's going. Then Normal People by Sally Rooney, and that is going straight in so bad. I'm sure you know this if you have seen me talk about this before, but it's just not a book I enjoy. I've not read any other Sally Rooney books as a consequence because I hated it so much. However, I adore the TV adaptation, but I think as a book it's just really hard to get into. It's got that whole pretentious no speech marks on the dialogue thing, which I think is completely unnecessary, and it just felt a bit like slow and difficult, and like the characters feel a lot more unlikable in the book than they are in the TV adaptation. I think in the adaptation we can really see them like struggling with who they are, with their relationship to each other, to what kind of life choices they make, but in the book it just doesn't come across as easily, so I couldn't connect to it and I didn't like it, so sorry, but it's going in there. Then another Taylor Jenkins Reid book, Daisy Jones and the Six, which I really loved, but I just don't think I get it as much as everybody else gets it. I enjoyed the structure, the way it's kind of written like an interview. I thought that was really unique, but ultimately I think it meant I didn't connect to it as much as I connected with Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I've just seen is also in this, so I'm going to put it straight up into so good, because I did really enjoy that. And it's definitely a better book for me than Daisy Jones was. Again, I haven't seen the TV adaptation, but I've heard really good things about it, and people really love and rave about the soundtrack, so I'll definitely try and read it, and I think it's going to be a really brilliant TV show because of all the music, and that's just something you can't really get across in a book as easily. So, but it is still a good book that I would recommend, but it's going in solid. Then Educated, which is another memoir, that I really enjoyed. I'm going to put it straight in solid because similarly to a few of the other books in here, it's a good book. I understand why people like it, but it's not like that memorable for me. Like, there were just parts of it I didn't really love, and I definitely didn't connect to in the same way I've connected to other memoirs like When Breath Becomes Air or Crying in Hmart, which I think just like touched me in a different way. But Educated, like, it's a good book. I completely understand why people love it, and I would recommend it, especially because it's an interesting take on I think she was a Mormon, so Mormonism and like what goes on in people's lives who are really invested in that like religion and in that church. But yeah, just solid, I think, is a good place for it. Then The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which a lot of people love and a lot of people hate, and I am going to put in It Was Okay. And the reason for that is because it is a good book in terms of like premise and in terms of what it was trying to achieve, but there are just too many like logistical hiccups and things where if you think about it too much, you just think, how, like, you just have too many questions. Like, there are so many unanswered questions and so many things where you think, well, if that's true, then how can this be the case? And it all just starts to unravel very quickly. And I think on the surface, yeah, it's fine, but when you try and dig underneath that, I just didn't love it. So I think for that, it's gonna only be an It Was Okay. All the Light We Cannot See, that is going in solid because I remember loving it when I read it. I want to watch the adaptation. Again, like any war kind of narrative literature, it's pretty heavy going, it's pretty emotional, there's a lot of hard parts to it, but it was really beautifully done. And I want to read more from Anthony Doerr because I haven't, and I know that his other books are also held in quite high acclaim, so I will at some point. And then the final two, I'll do The Girl on the Train first. That's a good thriller, loved it, like the movie as well, so that is going in solid, which makes perfect 2 tiers. I think it's a book that like it has aged really well in terms of like thrillers and in terms of still being a really good book now. I'm not sure how long ago it was published, but it must have been a little while ago. And yeah, it's really good. It's like a good twist, you won't see it coming, it's unpredictable, it's gripping. Tick, 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 a lot of reasons to love it. It's going in solid. And finally, Where the Crawdads Sing, which I read a few years ago, and it is going in so bad, simply for the reason that that author is a murderer and deserves to be in prison, literally. So I cannot give that book any higher ranking because it doesn't deserve any hype it has because of the atrocities that she has committed. So I'm going to put it in there and leave it there. So yeah, I think that is an interesting ranking overall. Quite mixed, I think, but like, yeah, in a good way, and I'm happy that most of it is towards the top. I do seem to agree with a lot of the popular books, but yeah, some of them not so much, and I hope I haven't I hope I haven't offended anybody too much. But let me know what you think, and let me know whether you've read any of these and whether you agree with my rankings or whether you agree they should be in this list at all. But I'll link the Goodreads article below and the TikTok that I saw as well that gave me this idea, and I hope you have enjoyed. And if you have, please like this video and please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.